He came home early to surprise his wife. Instead, he heard his mother trying to erase his unborn child from the family name. Julian Whitmore stopped in the marble hallway of the mansion, his suitcase still in his hand. He had not told anyone he was coming back. 3 nights of business meetings had left his shirt wrinkled, his eyes tired, and his heart heavy with guilt. He only wanted to find his wife Claire. Maybe hold her. Maybe apologize for leaving her alone too long. Then he heard his mother's voice through the half-open living room door. "If that baby is born under this roof," Margaret Whitmore said coldly, "I will make sure it never carries our name." Julian froze. Inside the room, Claire stood beside the pale sofa, one hand wrapped protectively around her pregnant belly. Her face was calm, but her fingers trembled against her blue dress. "You can take my name off your door," Claire said softly, "but you cannot take my child from me." Margaret gave a dry laugh. "Your child? You mean the best trap ever set for this family?" Julian's grip tightened on the suitcase handle. The golden evening light poured through the tall windows, but the room felt like a cage. On the coffee table lay an open envelope, legal papers, and a silver pen placed neatly beside them. "Sign it," Margaret ordered. "Leave today. Take the money. Disappear with dignity." Claire looked at the papers. Then she looked at the woman who had smiled at her for months in front of Julian. And for the first time Julian understood. His home had not been protecting his wife. It had been breaking her. Margaret Whitmore did not raise her voice. That made it worse. Her cruelty did not come like thunder. It came like ice. She stood beside the glass coffee table in her flawless cream dress, pearls resting against her throat, her silver hair pinned so perfectly that not one strand dared move. In front of Claire sat the open envelope. A legal agreement. Clean white pages. Black ink. A silver pen placed beside them like a knife. Julian stood at the doorway, unable to breathe. "Sign it," Margaret said again. Claire did not reach for the pen. Her hand stayed on her belly. The baby moved beneath her palm, a small kick, soft and private, as if even the child knew the room had become dangerous. Margaret leaned forward. "You leave this house today." Quietly. No scene, no reporters. No emotional performance. She tapped the document with one painted fingernail. "You will receive enough money to start over somewhere else. A decent apartment. Medical care. Privacy." Claire stared at the papers. Then she lifted her eyes. "Privacy?" she asked. Margaret's smile was thin. "Dignity." Claire gave a small broken laugh. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. But it cut through Julian more deeply than any scream could have. "You call this dignity?" Margaret's face hardened. "I call it mercy." Julian looked down at the pages from across the room. He could not see every line, but he saw enough. Separate residence. Confidentiality. Waiver of future claims. Protection of the Whitmore family reputation. His stomach twisted. This was not a mother losing control. This was planned. Prepared. Approved by lawyers. Margaret had not simply insulted Claire in a moment of anger. She had built a quiet exit door and tried to push Julian's wife through it before he came home. Claire took one slow breath. For months she had stood at dinners while Margaret corrected her words in front of the staff. She had smiled through family lunches where wealthy aunts laughed at her simple dresses. She had sat alone in that mansion carrying Julian's child while every room reminded her she was welcome only when she stayed silent. Now the silence was over. "You smiled at me in front of Julian," Claire said. "You called me sweetheart. You touched my shoulder when guests were watching." Margaret's eyes narrowed. Claire glanced at the agreement. "But when he was gone, you measured the price of my disappearance." The room went still. Even the distant sound of dishes in the service hall seemed to fade. Margaret straightened. "You are a young woman who does not understand the size of the world you walked into." Claire's fingers tightened around the soft fabric of her pale blue dress. "No," she said quietly. "I understand it now." Margaret pushed the pen closer. "Then be smart." Claire looked at the pen. For one awful second Julian thought she might take it. Not because she agreed. Because she was tired. Because humiliation can become heavy when no one helps carry it. Because a woman can be brave and still feel alone. Claire reached toward the table. Julian stepped forward. The floor creaked under his shoe. Both women turned. Margaret's face changed first. Shock flashed across it, then vanished behind control. "Julian," she said, as if he had simply arrived early for dinner. "You're back." Claire's face went pale. Not with relief. With shame. That destroyed him. Julian looked at the papers. Then at the pen. Then at his mother. His voice came out low. "What is this?" Margaret folded her hands. "A difficult conversation you were not supposed to walk into." Julian dropped his suitcase. The sound echoed through the room. "No," he said. "This is a contract to make my pregnant wife disappear." Claire lowered her eyes. And in that small movement Julian finally saw the truth. This was not the first wound. It was only the first one he had arrived in time to witness. Claire did not cry. That was what frightened Julian the most. She stood in the middle of that perfect living room surrounded by polished floors, tall windows and furniture no one was supposed to touch too hard. One hand rested on her belly, the other hung at her side, fingers curled into a fist so tight her knuckles had gone white. Margaret's silver pen still lay on the table. Waiting. Like the whole family had been waiting for Claire to disappear. Julian took another step inside. "Claire," he said softly. She did not look at him. Her eyes stayed on Margaret. For the first time since Julian had walked in, Margaret's smile faded. Not completely. Just enough for the mask to slip. "You should both calm down," Margaret said. "This can still be handled quietly." Claire gave a slow nod. "Quietly," she repeated. Her voice was low. But every word landed. "That is what you wanted from the beginning, wasn't it? Quiet dinners, quiet insults, quiet rules, quiet shame." Margaret's jaw tightened. Julian looked between them, each sentence opening a door he had refused to see before. Claire turned slightly toward him but still did not meet his eyes. "Do you know what quiet sounds like in this house, Julian?" He said nothing. She continued. "It sounds like your mother correcting me in front of the staff and everyone pretending not to hear. It sounds like your relatives laughing at my dress while you check your phone. It sounds like me saying I don't feel well here and you telling me I just need time to adjust." Julian's face went still. The memory hit him in pieces. Dinner tables. Small smiles. Claire's lowered eyes. His mother's soft, cruel voice dressed up as concern. He had been there. He had heard enough. He had simply chosen peace over truth. Margaret moved closer to the table. "That is enough," she said. Claire looked at her. "No, it isn't." The room changed. Not loudly. Not suddenly. But something shifted. Claire reached for the agreement. Julian's breath caught. Margaret watched her with satisfaction, already believing she had won. But Claire did not pick up the pen. She picked up the papers. Page by page, she looked through the contract that had been prepared to remove her from her own life. Her eyes moved across the lines about confidentiality, separation, money, reputation. Then she set the pages back down with careful hands. "I will not sign this." Margaret's face sharpened. "You are making a mistake." Claire finally turned fully toward her. "No," she said. "The mistake was thinking I came here to be bought." The words hung in the air. Julian felt them in his chest. Margaret let out a cold laugh. "You came into this family with nothing." Claire's hand moved to her belly. "I came with myself." Margaret stepped closer. "You can be removed from this house." "Yes," Claire said. "You can take my name off the door." Her voice trembled now. Only a little. But she did not back down. "You can tell your friends I was never good enough. You can write papers. You can call lawyers. You can stand in this beautiful room and pretend money makes you God." She paused. The baby moved again beneath her palm. Claire swallowed. "But you cannot take my child from me." Julian closed his eyes. The words broke something inside him. Not because they were loud. Because they were true. Margaret's face went pale with anger. "That child belongs to this family." Claire shook her head. "No. This child belongs to love, not a last name." For the first time, Margaret had no quick answer. Outside the tall windows, evening settled over the city. The golden light faded into blue. Inside the mansion, everything looked expensive, controlled, untouchable. But Claire stood there in a simple blue dress, exhausted and pregnant, facing the woman who had tried to erase her. And she did not move. Julian looked at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. Not fragile. Not helpless. Not the quiet woman everyone had mistaken for weak. Claire had been standing alone for months. And now finally she was standing in front of them all. Julian wanted to reach for Claire. He wanted to say he was sorry. He wanted to promise right there in that beautiful room that had suddenly become unbearable that everything would be different now. But Claire took one small step back. It was barely anything. Just the shift of her foot against the polished floor. Still, Julian felt it like a door closing. Margaret saw it too. And like always, she used the wound before anyone could cover it. "See," Margaret said, her voice smooth again. "She has already started." The trembling voice. The wounded eyes. "Next, she'll cry and tell you she suffered in silence because she loves you." Julian turned toward his mother. "Stop." One word. Cold. Sharp. The kind of word he had used in boardrooms when million-dollar deals were about to collapse. But Claire closed her eyes. Not with relief. With pain? "Don't speak to her like that because of me," she said quietly. "Not now." Julian stared at her. "Claire, I just heard what she said to you." Claire finally looked at him. And the sadness in her eyes hit harder than any accusation. "You heard it because you came home early," she said. "Not because you asked." The room fell silent. Julian's breath caught. Claire's voice stayed soft but it did not bend. You didn't hear me when I stopped talking at dinner. You didn't hear me when your mother corrected me in front of the staff. You didn't hear me when your aunt laughed at my dress and I sat there smiling like it didn't hurt. Julian's face tightened. Memories began to rise. One after another. A family dinner under warm chandelier light. Claire pushing food around her plate. Margaret saying, "Sweetheart, that is not how we pronounce it." Everyone laughing gently. Julian smiling too because it seemed easier than making the room uncomfortable. Another night. Claire standing in front of the mirror wearing a simple dress asking, "Do you think this is okay?" And Julian distracted by messages on his phone saying, "It's fine, just try to fit in tonight. Just try to fit in." The words came back like a slap. Claire touched her belly and continued. "You didn't hear me when I told you I felt alone in this house. You told me it would pass." Julian lowered his eyes. He remembered that too. He had been packing for a trip. She had stood by the bedroom door pale and tired, one hand on the frame. "I don't think your mother likes me," she had said. And he had kissed her forehead without stopping to look at her face. "She's intense," he had answered. "Don't take it personally. Don't take it personally." As if humiliation was a misunderstanding. As if loneliness was a mood. As if his wife had asked for comfort and he had handed her a polite excuse. Julian swallowed hard. "I didn't know," he whispered. Claire's mouth trembled. Then she nodded. "I know." 2 words. Simple. Devastating. They did not forgive him. They did not accuse him. They told the truth. He had not known because not knowing had been easier. Margaret crossed her arms. "This is exactly what I mean. She is turning your guilt against you." Julian looked at his mother, but for the first time, her voice sounded distant. Small, almost powerless. Because Claire's words had opened something inside him. He saw the mansion differently now. Not as a home. As a stage. A place where everyone knew their lines. Margaret played the gracious mother. The family played respectable old money. The staff looked away because they had learned survival. And Claire, pregnant and lonely, had been forced to play grateful. Julian had played his part too. The busy husband. The man who believed silence meant peace. The man who came home after the damage was done and called it love. He stepped toward Claire again, slower this time. "I failed you," he said. Claire looked away. Her hand moved gently across her belly. "Our child doesn't need a mansion," she said. "He needs a father who doesn't arrive after every humiliation." Julian stood frozen. Behind him, Margaret said nothing. For once there was nothing she could say. Because the truth had finally entered the room. And it had come in through the woman they all thought was too quiet to fight back. Julian was still trying to breathe when he noticed it. The necklace? A small antique shell pendant rested against Claire's throat, its surface carved with thin lines like rays of sunlight. She had worn it before. Many times. He had seen her touch it when she was nervous. He had watched her tuck it under her blouse when someone asked where it came from. But he had never really looked at it. Not until his mother did. Margaret's eyes dropped to the pendant. Only for a second. But Julian saw it. The color left her face. A flash of fear. Quick. Silent. Gone almost before it existed. Anyone else would have missed it. But Julian had spent years in conference rooms reading small movements from powerful people. A tightened jaw. A pause before a lie. A blink held too long. His mother was afraid of that necklace. Claire noticed too. Her fingers closed around the pendant. Margaret straightened as if someone had pulled a string through her spine. "Where did you get that?" she asked. Her voice sounded different now. Not cruel. Not controlled. Sharp. Exposed. Claire looked down at the necklace in her hand. It was my mother's. The room seemed to grow colder. Julian looked from Claire to Margaret. "Why does that matter?" Margaret's expression repaired itself in an instant. The elegant mask returned, but not perfectly. Something had cracked behind it. "It doesn't," she said. "I simply find it strange." Claire's eyes narrowed. "Strange?" Margaret lifted her chin. "People often choose symbols to make themselves look more important than they are." Claire's face changed. Not anger first. Pain. Old pain. "My mother didn't care about looking important," Claire said. "She worked." Margaret said nothing. Claire's thumb moved across the carved shell. She cleaned hotel rooms, double shifts, long nights. She came home smelling like bleach with swollen feet and cracked hands. Her voice softened. But she still made dinner. Still checked my homework. Still told me never to bow my head to people who confuse a last name with character. Julian looked at his wife. A whole life sat behind those words. A life he had never asked enough about. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "Careful, Claire." Claire lifted her head. "No," she said. "You be careful." The words were quiet, but they shook the air. Margaret's eyes went back to the pendant. Claire saw it again. And this time she did not hide the necklace. She pulled it fully into the light. The little shell caught the last blue glow of evening. Its carved lines shone softly against her skin. My mother wore this every day, Claire said. She said it belonged to someone who was never allowed to claim what was hers. Julian felt something move through him. A warning. A memory. The sudden silence at family dinners when the old hotel was mentioned. His mother closing envelopes too quickly. Phone calls that ended when he walked into the room. Conversations about the Valparaiso project that always stopped before Claire appeared. He had thought it was business. Family money. Old property. Nothing more. Now standing in front of his pregnant wife and his pale-faced mother, he knew it was something else. What was your mother's name? Julian asked. Claire looked at him for a long moment. There was love in her eyes. But it was buried under disappointment. Marianne Wells, she said. Margaret inhaled. Barely. But enough. Julian turned to his mother. You know that name. Margaret did not answer. Claire's hand stayed on the pendant. My mother died working to pay for medicine she hid from me, she said. If she ever entered places where people like you thought she didn't belong, it was with a tray in her hand and pain in her feet. Margaret's composure flickered again. Julian stepped closer to the table where the unsigned agreement still lay waiting. Suddenly, the papers looked less like a contract and more like a cover-up. Claire's necklace was not just jewelry. It was proof that something buried had survived. And for the first time that night, Julian understood why his mother wanted Claire gone before he came home. She was not only afraid of the baby, she was afraid of the woman carrying it. And the secret hanging around her neck. Margaret's silence lasted too long. That was the first confession. Julian stood near the coffee table, staring at his mother as if a stranger had stepped into her skin. The woman who could crush a room with one raised eyebrow now seemed trapped by a small shell pendant hanging from Claire's neck. Claire saw it. Julian saw it. And Margaret knew they saw it. Say her name, Julian said. Margaret's eyes cut toward him. This is absurd. No, Julian said. What's absurd is my wife wearing her mother's necklace and you looking at it like it just came back from the dead. Claire's fingers tightened around the pendant. The living room felt smaller now. The high ceilings, the expensive art, the silent staff beyond the hallway, none of it mattered. Something old was waking up in that room. Margaret walked to the bar and poured herself water. Her hand was steady. Too steady? Marianne Wells was a hotel employee, she said, a woman who knew how to move through places she did not belong. Claire's face went still. Julian turned sharply. Don't. But Claire raised one hand. No. Let her speak. Margaret looked at her with a calm cruelty that had been practiced for years. Your mother cleaned rooms. Carried trays. Smiled at wealthy men. Women like that learn quickly where power lives. Claire's lips parted but no words came out. For a moment, she was not the strong woman who had refused the contract. She was a daughter. A little girl again, hearing her dead mother dragged through the dirt by someone who had never known hunger over time or aching feet. Then Claire straightened. My mother worked because she had to, she said. She worked sick. She worked tired. She worked when people like you looked through her like she was furniture. Margaret's eyes flashed. She was not innocent. The words dropped hard. Julian stared at his mother. What does that mean? Margaret did not answer him. She looked only at Claire. Your mother got close to this family long before you did. The room went quiet. Claire's breath changed. Soft. Uneven. Julian heard it and felt something inside him tighten. What are you talking about? He asked. Margaret lifted her chin but her voice had lost its polish. She worked at the old hotel, the one in Valparaiso. Your father was there often, too often. Julian froze. His father. The old hotel. The unfinished conversations. The hidden files. The way Margaret had always spoken of that place with a bitterness that never matched a simple business dispute. Claire stared at her. My mother never told me that. Of course she didn't, Margaret said. Women like that never tell the whole story. They leave pieces behind. A necklace. A child. A claim. A stain. Julian slammed his hand down on the table. The silver pen jumped. That's enough. Margaret flinched. For the first time she actually flinched. Claire did not move. Her eyes had filled but no tear fell. My mother died with nothing, she said. No mansion. No lawyers. No family name protecting her. Just medical bills, double shifts, and a daughter she was trying to raise. Margaret looked away. That small movement said more than any answer. Julian stepped closer to his mother. You didn't hate Claire because she was poor, he said slowly. You hated her because she reminded you of Marianne. Margaret's jaw tightened. Julian's voice dropped. And because Marianne had something to do with father. Margaret's face hardened again but the fear underneath was still there. Claire touched the pendant as if it were the last warm thing in the room. "So that's why you wanted me gone," she said. "Not because of my baby. Not only because of Julian." She looked at the unsigned papers on the table. "You were afraid I would find out what my mother knew." Margaret's eyes burned. "You know nothing." Claire took one step forward. "No," she said. "But you do." The mansion seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the city lights began to glow in the distance. Inside, Julian looked at his mother and understood the truth with painful clarity. This was never just about class. It was never just about pregnancy. It was about Marianne Wells. It was about his father. And it was about a secret Margaret had spent years trying to bury before Claire walked into the family carrying it around her neck. Julian did not wait for Margaret to explain. He reached for the small folder half hidden beneath a glossy magazine on the side table. Margaret moved fast. Too fast. "Leave that alone," she snapped. Julian stopped with the folder already in his hand. The room changed again. Claire stood near the doorway, one hand on her belly, the shell pendant shining against her throat. Her face was pale now, not from fear but from the terrible feeling that the past was walking toward her. Julian opened the folder. Inside were old copies of documents. A torn photograph. Several handwritten notes. Names circled in red ink. Marianne Wells. The Grand Harbor Hotel. Property transfer. Unregistered claim. Julian read the words once. Then again. His voice came out rough. "What is this?" Margaret's eyes hardened. "Family business." Claire took one careful step closer. "My mother's name is in that folder." Margaret looked at her. "And that does not make it yours." Claire flinched, but she did not look away. Julian unfolded the torn photograph. It showed the old hotel by the water back when its white walls still looked new and its balconies faced the sea like open arms. Standing near the entrance was a younger Marianne Wells wearing a work uniform, her hair pulled back, her hand resting lightly over the same shell necklace. Beside her stood Julian's father. Not touching her. Not smiling. But close enough for the picture to feel like a secret. Julian felt his stomach drop. "This is the hotel in Valparaiso," he said. Margaret said nothing. Claire stared at the photograph. Her breathing shook. "My mother worked there," she whispered. Julian looked through the papers again. There were notes about the hotel's original renovation, a dispute over ownership, a private agreement never filed publicly, a transfer that had gone through after Marianne's name had been removed. Removed. The word sat on the page like a crime. Claire reached for the back of a chair to steady herself. "My mother told me that hotel was special," she said. "She never said why. She only said some places remember the people who built them even when rich families forget." Margaret's face twisted. "That woman filled your head with stories." Claire looked at her. "No. She filled my life with work. With survival. With dignity." Julian found another page. A letter. Old. Folded. Unsigned. But the handwriting was his father's. He did not read it aloud at first. His eyes moved across the lines and with each sentence his face changed. Regret. Shock. Shame. Claire watched him. "What does it say?" Julian swallowed. "It says Marianne had a rightful stake in the hotel." Margaret turned away. Claire went completely still. Julian continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "It says the hotel would not have survived without her money, her contacts and her work. It says promises were made." He looked at his mother. "And then buried." Margaret's voice cracked like glass. "You don't know what happened." "Then tell us," Julian said. She said nothing. And that silence gave the answer. Claire's hand rose to the pendant. For years she had thought it was only a memory of her mother. A small piece of love passed down from a woman who had nothing else to give. Now it felt heavier. Like proof. Like inheritance. Like a voice from a grave finally reaching the living. Margaret stepped toward Julian. "You will destroy this family over a dead hotel maid." Julian looked at her as if he had never seen her before. "No," he said. "You already did that." Claire closed her eyes. A tear finally slipped down her cheek. Not because she was weak. Because somewhere inside her the little girl who watched her mother come home exhausted every night had just learned the truth. Her mother had not been invisible. She had been erased. And the family standing in front of her had helped do it. The mansion was silent now. The papers lay open. The photograph trembled in Julian's hand. And the secret Margaret had buried beneath money manors and marble floors had finally broken through the surface. The old Grand Harbor Hotel did not only belong to the Whitmore name, part of it belonged to Marianne Wells. And through her it belonged to Claire too. Claire did not reach for the folder. Not right away. She stood in the middle of the living room, one hand pressed to her belly, the other closed around the shell pendant that had suddenly become heavier than gold. For years it had been the last gentle thing her mother left behind. Now it was evidence. A memory? A warning. Julian held the old photograph in his hand, his face drained of color. Margaret stood near the bar stiff and pale like a woman watching a locked door open from the inside. Claire looked at them both. Then she looked at the papers on the table. The agreement. The money. The silence. The neat little plan to remove her before the truth could breathe. And something inside her settled. Not anger. Not revenge. Something stronger. Decision. I want copies of everything, Claire said. Her voice was calm. Julian looked up. Claire. No, she said, cutting him off gently. Not later. Not after your lawyers review it. Not after your mother explains it in a way that protects this family. Margaret's eyes narrowed. You have no idea what you are touching. Claire turned to her. I know exactly what I'm touching. She stepped closer to the table, slowly, carefully, like every movement had to protect the child inside her and the mother who was no longer there to speak. I'm touching the story you stole from my mother. Margaret's lips tightened. That woman is dead. Claire's eyes flashed. Yes, she said. And that is why you got away with it for so long. The words struck the room like a slap. Julian lowered the photograph. For the first time, he did not interrupt. He did not try to fix it. He simply stood there and listened. Claire picked up the unsigned contract. The same pages Margaret had pushed toward her as if a woman's dignity could be bought with a quiet check and a separate address. Claire read the first page again. Confidentiality. Separation. No claims. No public statements. She gave a small, bitter smile. This was never about protecting Julian, she said. And it was never about protecting the baby? She looked at Margaret. This was about burying Marianne Wells a second time. Margaret inhaled sharply. Claire placed the contract back on the table. Then, with both hands steady, she slid it away from herself. I will not sign away my voice. Julian's eyes filled with something close to shame. Claire finally looked at him. Really looked at him. You asked me once why I didn't tell you more about my mother, she said. Julian said nothing. Claire's voice softened, but it did not weaken. Because every time I brought her into rooms like this, people made her smaller. A maid, a poor woman, a mistake, a rumor, a name people could say with pity or disgust. She touched the pendant. But she was my mother. She worked until her hands cracked. She loved me when she had nothing left to give. And if she helped build that hotel, if she was promised something, if her name was erased, then I am done letting other people decide what her life meant. Margaret stepped forward. You will regret this. Claire turned to her with quiet fire. No, Mrs. Whitmore. I already regret staying silent. The room went still. Even Julian seemed to stop breathing. Claire picked up her purse from the sofa. Her hands trembled now, but she did not hide it. Courage did not mean she was unafraid. It meant she was leaving anyway. Julian moved toward her. Where are you going? Claire paused near the doorway. To see the lawyer who knew my mother. Margaret's face changed. Just enough? Claire saw it. So did Julian. And after that, Claire continued, I'm going to learn my own story from the beginning, not from whispers. Not from your family. Not from people who call truth a scandal because it makes them uncomfortable. Julian's voice broke. Claire, let me come with you. She looked at him for a long moment. There was love there. But love was not enough tonight. Not yet, she said. The words were gentle. And final. Our child doesn't need a father who chases me after the truth comes out. He needs one who can stand still long enough to face it. Then Claire walked out. No shouting. No dramatic collapse. Just the sound of her steps crossing the marble floor. For the first time since she entered the Whitmore mansion, she was not asking to belong. She was taking back what had always been hers. Her name. Her mother. Her story. Julian did not run after Claire. Every part of him wanted to. His feet were already turned toward the hallway, his hand half raised, his mouth open with her name sitting on his tongue. But he stopped. Because for once Claire had told him exactly what she needed. Not a rescue. Not a speech. Not another promise made too late. She needed him to stand still and face the truth. So he turned back to Margaret. The living room looked different now. The same marble. The same glass. The same perfect furniture. But the room no longer felt powerful. It felt exposed. Margaret stood near the bar, one hand wrapped around a glass she had not drunk from. Her face had regained its shape but not its strength. Julian walked to the table and picked up the folder again. Who else knows? He asked. Margaret looked away. That is not your concern. Julian gave a short, humorless laugh. My wife just walked out of this house carrying my child because you tried to erase her, and you still think you decide what concerns me. Margaret's eyes sharpened. You are emotional. No, Julian said. I am late. That landed. For the first time, Margaret had no answer ready. Julian opened the folder and spread the papers across the table. The photograph of Marianne Wells. The notes about the Grand Harbor Hotel. The old transfer documents. The hidden claim. Then he pulled out his phone. Margaret's voice turned hard. What are you doing? Julian did not look at her. Calling Victor Hale. Margaret stiffened. The name meant something. Victor Hale was the family's senior legal advisor, the man who had handled Whitmore property deals for more than 20 years. Calm voice. Expensive suits. Clean hands on dirty work. The call connected on the third ring. Mr. Whitmore, Victor said smoothly. I wasn't expecting. I want a full audit, Julian said. Silence. Then Victor cleared his throat. Of which division? The Grand Harbor Project. All of it. Land history, original ownership, private agreements, transfers, renovations, offshore payments, sealed files, everything. Margaret stepped forward. Julian, hang up. He looked straight at her. And I want it independent, he continued. Not through our usual office, not through anyone loyal to my mother. Victor's voice changed. Careful now. That is a serious request. It's an order. Margaret's glass hit the bar with a sharp crack. You are making a mistake that could damage this family for generations. Julian finally lowered the phone. No, Mother. I'm checking whether this family damaged someone else first. Victor said nothing. Julian could hear papers moving on the other end. A man suddenly realizing the safe version of the night was gone. There may be sensitivities, Victor said. Julian's jaw tightened. There is a pregnant woman who was just handed a silence contract in my living room. There is a dead woman whose name is buried in our property files. And there is a hotel project worth millions built on documents my wife was never supposed to see. He paused. So don't talk to me about sensitivities. Margaret's face went pale again. Julian turned toward the windows. Outside, the city lights stretched across the dark like 1,000 quiet witnesses. I am taking direct control of the Grand Harbor Project, effective now, he said. No document moves without my approval. No board statement, no press leak, no private meeting. Send written confirmation within the hour. Victor hesitated. Yes, Mr. Whitmore. Julian ended the call. The room fell into a silence so heavy it seemed to press against the walls. Margaret stared at him. You would choose her over your own blood. Julian looked down at the photograph of Marianne Wells. Then at the unsigned contract. Then back at his mother. For years I thought blood meant loyalty, he said. Tonight I learned it can also mean silence. Margaret's lips trembled with anger. She will destroy you. Julian shook his head. No. She already saved me. He picked up the folder and held it against his chest. Not like a weapon. Like responsibility. For the first time in his life, Julian Whitmore was not protecting the family name. He was questioning what it had cost. And somewhere beyond those marble walls, Claire was walking into the night carrying the truth he should have looked for long ago. By sunrise, the Whitmore mansion was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm when everyone inside the house pretends the walls did not shake. Julian had not slept. He sat alone in his study, the folder open in front of him, Marianne Wells's photograph under the yellow desk lamp. Beside it lay the unsigned agreement Margaret had tried to force on Claire. Every page looked worse in daylight. Not cleaner. Not more reasonable. Worse. Because now Julian could see it for what it was. A planned disappearance. At 7:12 a.m., his phone buzzed. Then again. And again. By the fourth call he already knew. Margaret had moved first. The headline was everywhere before breakfast. Pregnant wife of Whitmore heir leaves mansion amid questions over family fortune. Julian stared at the screen. His blood went cold. Another article appeared minutes later. Sources say young wife demanded money before walking out. Sources. That word almost made him laugh. He knew exactly who the source was. The article did not mention the contract. It did not mention the threats. It did not mention Claire standing alone in the living room with one hand over her unborn child while Margaret tried to erase her. No. It called Claire unstable. It called her ambitious. It suggested she had married into the Whitmore family, too quickly gotten pregnant too soon and left when financial expectations were not met. Julian stood so fast, his chair hit the wall behind him. Across the house, Margaret was already in the breakfast room. Perfectly dressed. Pearls in place. Coffee untouched. A newspaper folded beside her plate like she had not just lit a match and thrown it into Claire's life. Julian walked in holding his phone. You did this. Margaret lifted her eyes slowly. I protected the family. You lied. I corrected the narrative before she created one. Julian's hand tightened around the phone. She left because you tried to buy her silence. Margaret's expression did not change. She left because women like that know when pressure becomes profitable. Julian stared at her. For a second he did not recognize the woman who had raised him. Or maybe he finally did. You leaked this to punish her. Margaret set down her cup. No, Julian. I leaked it because the world respects the first story it hears. The words landed with sickening precision. Claire had barely walked out with the truth and Margaret had already wrapped that truth in shame. Across town, Claire sat in the waiting room of Dr. Alan Pierce, the lawyer who had once represented her mother. Her phone was face down on her lap. It kept vibrating. She did not touch it. She already knew. People had started texting. Some with concern. Some with curiosity. Some with the kind of pity that feels like another insult. Her hands trembled over her belly. The baby shifted, and Claire closed her eyes. Not here. Not now. She had promised herself she would not break in another room built by powerful men. Dr. Pierce opened the office door. He was older than she expected. Thin, silver-haired. His suit was worn at the cuffs. When he saw the shell pendant at her neck, his face softened. "You look like your mother," he said. That was when Claire almost cried. Almost. But she swallowed it down. "My name is being dragged through the press," she said. "Mrs. Whitmore wants people to think I left for money?" Dr. Pierce's eyes darkened. "And did you?" Claire looked at him. "No." He nodded once. "Then we answer carefully." Claire sat straighter. "I don't want revenge. I know. I don't want to destroy Julian. I understand." Her voice shook but her eyes stayed clear. "I want the truth to survive longer than their lie." Back at the mansion, Julian called Victor Hale again. "No statements from the family," Julian said. "No more leaks. No unnamed sources. If one more article appears attacking Claire, I will personally release the contract my mother handed her." Margaret stood in the doorway behind him. Her face hardened. Julian did not turn around. "And Victor," he added, "start preserving every communication tied to last night." A silence followed. Then Victor answered quietly. "Understood." Julian ended the call. Margaret spoke from behind him. "You would expose your own mother." Julian turned. "No," he said. "You exposed yourself?" Outside, the city was fully awake now. Cars moved through the morning streets. Phones lit up. Strangers read headlines and believed what they were given. But inside a small lawyer's office across town, Claire finally picked up her phone. She read the lies. One by one, her lips pressed together. Then she placed the phone on the desk and looked at Dr. Pierce. "Help me write a statement." Her voice was calm now. Not broken. Not begging. Because Margaret had started a war with whispers. And Claire was about to answer with dignity. Claire did not write the statement in anger. That surprised Dr. Alan Pierce. He had seen people destroyed by powerful families before. He had watched good people walk into his office, shaking furious, ready to burn every name attached to their pain. But Claire sat across from him with one hand on her belly and the other resting near her mother's old shell pendant. Her face was tired. Her eyes were red. Still, her voice stayed steady. "I don't want to sound like them," she said. Dr. Pierce looked over his reading glasses. "Like who?" Claire glanced at the phone on the desk where the headline still glowed. "People who use shame because the truth is too dangerous." The lawyer leaned back slowly. For a moment he did not speak. Then he nodded. "All right," he said. "Then we keep it clean." Claire looked down at the blank page. The first sentence took the longest. Not because she had nothing to say. Because she had too much. She could have described Margaret's voice in the living room. The contract. The pen. The way Julian walked in too late. She could have told the world that an unborn child had been threatened before it ever took its first breath. But she did not. Revenge would have been easy. Dignity took more strength. Across town, Julian stood in his study as Victor Hale's written confirmation arrived. No documents would move on the Grand Harbor project without Julian's approval. A full independent audit had been requested. Julian read the email twice. Then his phone buzzed. Claire's statement had gone public. He opened it with his thumb already trembling. "I have not demanded money from the Whitmore family. I have not entered any negotiation for personal gain. My priority is my child, my health, and the truth about my late mother's history with the Grand Harbor Hotel. I ask for privacy while legal documents are reviewed." That was all. No insult. No accusation against Julian. No dramatic attack. Just enough truth to stop the lie from standing alone. Julian sat down slowly. Somehow, her restraint hurt more than anger. Because Claire could have destroyed him in one paragraph. She could have told the world he had been blind in his own home. She did not. Margaret entered without knocking. She had already seen the statement. Julian knew by the hard line of her mouth. "She is clever," Margaret said. Julian looked up. "She is honest?" "She is positioning herself." "No," Julian said. "She is protecting what you tried to bury without becoming cruel like you." Margaret's eyes flashed. "You still don't understand how this works." Julian stood. "I think I finally do." He held up the phone. "You fed the press a lie." She answered with one paragraph. No drama, no revenge. And somehow she looked stronger than all of us. Margaret stepped closer. That statement mentions the hotel. Yes? That will raise questions. It should. Margaret's face tightened with panic she could no longer fully hide. You are letting her open a door that should stay closed. Julian's voice dropped. No, Mother. You locked that door on a dead woman and then tried to lock it on her daughter. Meanwhile, in Dr. Pierce's office, Claire watched the statement spread. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Reporters. Unknown numbers. Messages from people who had ignored her yesterday and suddenly cared today. She turned the phone over. Dr. Pierce studied her carefully. You did well. Claire gave a faint smile. I don't feel like I won. You weren't trying to win. She looked toward the window. Outside, ordinary people crossed the street with coffee cups, grocery bags, briefcases. Life moved on even when a family history cracked open. Claire touched the pendant. My mother spent her whole life being spoken about by people who never listened to her, she said. I won't let them do that to me. Dr. Pierce nodded. Then he slid a folder across the desk. There is more you need to see. Claire looked at it. Her hand shook before she opened it. But she opened it anyway. Because the lie had been answered. The silence had been broken. And Claire had learned something powerful that morning. She did not have to scream to be heard. She only had to tell the truth and refuse to disappear. Julian thought the worst truth had already been found. He was wrong. By late afternoon, the independent audit had begun pulling old files from places the Whitmore family had kept untouched for years. Storage rooms. Legal archives. Sealed boxes marked with polite words like historical records and inactive property. But old lies do not sleep forever. They wait. Julian stood in the Grand Harbor Project office, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, staring at a stack of documents Victor Hale had placed on the conference table. Victor did not look comfortable anymore. His expensive calm was gone. There are irregularities, Victor said. Julian looked at him. Say it plainly. Victor swallowed. The original ownership records were altered before the hotel transfer was finalized. Julian felt the room tilt. Across the table lay a copy of an old agreement involving Marianne Wells, Claire's mother. A woman his family had dismissed as a hotel maid, a rumor, a problem. But there it was. Her name. Her signature. Her claim. Julian picked up the page slowly. Who approved the alteration? Victor hesitated. Julian's eyes hardened. Say it. Victor lowered his voice. Your mother. The words did not explode. They sank. Heavy. Final. Julian turned toward the window. Outside, the city moved as if nothing had happened. Cars, office lights, people walking home. Ordinary life. Inside him, something collapsed. For years he had trusted Margaret's version of everything. Her discipline, her elegance. Her warnings about people who wanted the family name. He had mistaken control for protection. Now he understood. His mother had not been protecting the family. She had been protecting a theft. His phone buzzed. Claire? For 1 second, he only stared at her name. Then he answered. Julian, she said. Her voice was calm but tired. I found something too. He closed his eyes. What? Dr. Pierce had shown Claire an old letter from Marianne. A letter never sent. In it, Marianne had written that promises had been made about the hotel. That Julian's father knew the truth. That she was afraid Margaret would erase her before anyone could hear her side. Claire's voice trembled on the last line. She wrote, one day my daughter may need proof that I was not lying. Julian gripped the edge of the table. He had no defense left. No explanation clean enough. No apology big enough. Claire, he whispered, my mother changed the records. Silence. Then a small breath. Not surprise. Grief. Julian hated that most. Claire had already known enough pain that even betrayal sounded familiar. And your father, she asked. Julian looked at another document on the table. His father's handwriting. Notes about Marianne. Regret buried in ink. A promise half kept then abandoned. He knew, Julian said. The words burned his throat. He knew she had a claim. He knew what was done. And he stayed silent. Claire did not answer right away. Julian could hear the faint hum of traffic through her phone, maybe from Dr. Pierce's office window, maybe from the street outside. For a moment they were not husband and wife. They were two people standing on opposite sides of a family's buried sin. Then Claire spoke. My mother died, thinking no one believed her. Julian lowered his head. I'm sorry. It sounded small. Almost useless. But it was all he had. Claire's voice softened, not with forgiveness but with exhaustion. This is bigger than us now. Julian looked at the documents. Yes, he said. But I helped make it us. Every time I didn't ask. Every time I looked away. Every time I believed silence meant peace. Across town, Claire sat with one hand on her belly and the other on her mother's letter. Her eyes filled, but she did not break. Julian continued. I can't undo what my family did. And I can't undo what I failed to see. But I can stop protecting the lie. Claire closed her eyes. For the first time, Julian was not asking her to come home. He was not asking for comfort. He was facing the wreckage. And that was the first honest thing he had done all day. Outside, evening began to fall again. The same hour when Julian had walked into the mansion and heard his mother threaten his wife. Only now the darkness did not hide the truth. It revealed it. The board meeting was called for 8:00 the next morning. Not in the grand dining room. Not in Margaret Whitmore's private office where she had controlled the family for decades with polished smiles and quiet threats. This time Julian chose the glass conference room at Whitmore Holdings. No portraits. No silver tea service. No family memories on the wall. Just a long table, 12 leather chairs, and a city skyline staring back at them. Margaret arrived last. Of course she did. Cream suit, pearls, perfect hair. Chin lifted like nothing in the world had changed. But everyone in the room knew something had changed. Victor Hale sat near the end of the table, eyes lowered, a thick folder in front of him. 2 independent auditors sat beside him with laptops open. Board members whispered until Julian walked in. Then the room went silent. Julian did not sit. He stood at the head of the table with the Grand Harbor files stacked neatly before him. For a moment he looked like the man Margaret had raised. Calm, controlled, powerful. Then he opened the folder. My mother is being removed from all decisions related to the Grand Harbor Hotel project effective immediately. Margaret's eyes snapped toward him. No one breathed. Julian continued. She will no longer review documents, authorize communication, contact legal counsel, speak to the press, or represent this family in any matter connected to that property. Margaret laughed once. Soft. Dangerous. You cannot do that. Julian looked at Victor. Victor cleared his throat. Under the current corporate governance structure, Mr. Whitmore can assume direct oversight pending investigation of material irregularities. Margaret turned on him. Victor. The word was a warning. But Victor did not fold this time. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the file. The records support it. That sentence landed like a hammer. Margaret's face changed. Not much. But enough. The room saw it. Julian placed one document in the center of the table. This is an altered ownership record. Then another. This is a suppressed private agreement. Another. This is correspondence referring to Marianne Wells and her claim to the original hotel investment. Margaret's lips tightened. Marianne Wells was an employee. Julian's voice stayed low. She was a person. The room went still. She had a name. A signature. A claim. And according to these documents, this family knew it. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Margaret leaned back. You are letting your wife poison your judgment. Julian looked at her for a long time. No, he said. My wife made me look at what you trained me not to see. That hit harder than anger. Margaret's mask cracked. You think Claire is innocent? You think she just happened to walk into this family wearing that necklace? You think this is love? Julian's hands rested on the table. I think you tried to force a pregnant woman to sign away her rights before I came home. No one moved. I think you fed the press a lie before sunrise. Margaret's eyes flashed. I protected our name. Julian nodded slowly. Yes. That's what you always call it. He opened the final folder. But protecting a name is not the same as protecting the truth. Across town, Claire sat in Dr. Pierce's office watching the meeting through a secure video link Julian had sent her. She had not asked to watch. He had offered. No pressure. No demand. Just proof. Her hand rested on her belly as Julian spoke. Until the investigation is complete, he said, Margaret Whitmore will have no authority over Grand Harbor. Margaret stood. This family will regret humiliating me. Julian met her eyes. No, mother. This family is finally done humiliating others. For the first time in her life, Margaret Whitmore had no room left to command. No whispered order. No hidden lawyer. No silence waiting to protect her. The vote was taken. One by one hands rose. Not out of courage at first. Out of fear of the evidence. But they rose. Margaret remained standing as her power slipped out of the room quietly, officially, completely. On Claire's screen, Julian did not smile. He simply gathered the papers and looked into the camera for one brief second. Not like a man asking to be forgiven. Like a man finally beginning to earn the right to ask. Claire did not come back to the mansion. Not that day. Not the next. Julian did not ask her to. For the first time, he understood that love was not dragging someone back into the place where they had been hurt. Love was making sure the door stayed open without standing in front of it. So, they met somewhere neutral. A small cafe near the courthouse. No marble floors. No family portraits. No staff pretending not to hear. Just wooden tables, warm light, the smell of coffee, and rain tapping softly against the windows. Claire arrived in a gray coat, one hand resting on her belly. The shell pendant was tucked beneath her collar, but Julian knew it was there. He stood too quickly when he saw her. Then stopped himself. "Hi," he said. Claire nodded. "Hi." So much history sat between those two small words. Julian wanted to explain everything. The board meeting. His mother's removal. The audit. The documents. The calls he had made. But Claire already knew enough. And this meeting was not about him proving he had finally done the right thing. It was about listening. They sat across from each other. For a while neither spoke. The waitress brought tea for Claire and black coffee for Julian. Claire wrapped both hands around the warm cup, and Julian noticed the slight swelling in her fingers, the tired shadow under her eyes. He had missed those things before. He would not miss them again. "I found an apartment," Claire said. Julian's chest tightened. "Is it safe?" "Yes." "Do you need anything?" She looked at him. The old Julian would have mistaken the question for kindness. Now he heard the danger in it. Money could become control if offered the wrong way. So he corrected himself. "I mean," he said carefully, "tell me what support looks like without taking away your choice." Claire's expression changed. "Just a little. Not forgiveness. But recognition." "That's a better question," she said. Julian nodded. "I'm trying to learn." Claire looked out the window. A man helped an older woman across the wet sidewalk. Cars rolled past slowly, headlights blurred by rain. "My doctor says the baby is fine," she said. Julian closed his eyes for 1 second. Relief passed through him so strongly his hands shook. "Thank God," he whispered. Claire watched him. "Our son is fine," she added. Julian looked up. "A son?" The word nearly broke him. He smiled, but it did not reach too far. He knew better than to turn her news into his moment. Claire's hand moved over her belly. "I don't want him raised inside a war," she said. "He won't be." "You can't promise that just because your mother lost one vote?" Julian nodded. "You're right." That answer surprised her. He continued, "I can promise boundaries. Legal ones. Personal ones. I can promise she will not have access to you, the baby, or decisions about your lives unless you allow it." Claire studied him. "And us?" The question was quiet. Julian looked down at his coffee. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I love you. But I know that doesn't repair what I ignored." Claire's eyes softened with sadness. "No, it doesn't. I want to earn trust," he said. "Not demand it." Rain slid down the window between them and the street. Claire took a slow breath. "My mother spent her life being forced to accept whatever powerful people decided. I won't live that way. You shouldn't. And I won't come home just because you finally saw the truth." Julian swallowed. "I know." For the first time, the silence between them did not feel like punishment. It felt like space. Space for pain. Space for honesty. Space for something new if it ever grew. Claire reached into her bag and placed a copy of Marianne's letter on the table. "I want you to read all of it," she said. "Not tonight as a husband trying to win me back. Read it as the son of the man who stayed silent." Julian touched the paper carefully. Like it was sacred. "I will." Claire stood a few minutes later. Julian did not reach for her arm. He did not ask her to stay. He only walked her to the door and held it open as the rain cooled the air between them. Before stepping outside, Claire paused. "You were late, Julian." His eyes filled. "I know." She looked at him. "But you're here now?" Then she walked into the rain, one hand over their son, moving slowly but steadily toward her own life. Julian watched her go. Not chasing. Not controlling. Just standing there with the letter in his hand, finally understanding that healing would not be a grand reunion. It would be small. Truthful. Slow. And this time he would have to show up before the hurt began. Months later, the old Grand Harbor Hotel opened its doors again. Not for investors. Not for cameras. For the people whose names had been forgotten. Claire stood in the lobby beneath restored brass lights, holding her newborn son against her chest. Julian stood beside her, quiet, no longer trying to lead the moment. On the wall behind them, a new bronze plaque caught the morning sun. Marianne Wells Memorial Fund. Honoring the workers who built this place with their hands, their sacrifice, and their dignity. Claire touched her mother's shell pendant. For the first time, it did not feel heavy. It felt alive. Young students in hospitality uniforms filled the lobby. Some came from families with very little. Some had mothers who cleaned rooms, fathers who worked night shifts, grandparents who carried pain silently for years. Now their futures had a name attached to them. Marianne's name. Julian looked at Claire. "I wish I had seen it sooner," he said. Claire looked at the plaque, then at their son. "So do I," she whispered. "But now he will." The the baby stirred in her arms. Outside the ocean wind moved through the open doors, and inside that hotel the truth finally had a home. Sometimes the deepest wounds are not caused by strangers. They come from silence, from looking away, from choosing comfort over truth. But healing begins when someone finally has the courage to say, "This story matters, this person mattered, I will not let them disappear." Never underestimate a quiet person. Sometimes they are carrying a truth powerful enough to change an entire family. What part of Claire's journey touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more emotional stories that remind us why truth, dignity, and love still matter.